So for today, you had worksheet 3 that I had given you. And I had asked you on the front side to try to vertically align the rhythm of that treble and bass staff as accurately as you could. And then on the back side, I asked you, no, it's on the same side, I forget. I asked you on a different piece of paper, on your own staff paper, to write out a part, or was it the first, I don't know, 16 or so measures of the second clarinet, I think, from that score that I gave you. And the score was on the back side, right? Yeah. Okay, good. So, before I forget, make sure, I'll give you a chance to ask questions, but could you make sure your name is on both the handout and then your own staff paper? Because that way, when I do collect it, if something gets lost in the shuffle, I'll be able to know whose it is. All right, so, any questions on either the aligning or the part on the
part on the back side, did we have to put a range by aligning, or was it just aligning?
For the back side, or for the part, you do not need to put arranged by your name. You can just put your name anywhere so that I know it's yours. Yeah, because you're really not arranging anything or transcribing anything here. You're just extracting part. Yeah, so yeah, that's a fair question. But make sure you have, like, for instance, like the title and the composer and the instrument part and transposition of the instrument, the key of the instrument, I should say. Those kinds of things. So make sure you have that. Good. Any other questions that you might have, either on the part or on the vertical aligning of the rhythm? Okay. Okay. Well, then, as I said, just make sure your name is somewhere on those 2 pages, and I'll pick up both of them. Pick up both of them. Thank you, sir. All right, thank you. One thing I've noticed that I kind of, there's one little drawback, I think, for me about teaching in this room compared to where I used to teach in room 20. And that is, in room 20, since it was smaller, I don't know, everyone was a little bit closer and they didn't have to speak quite as loud. Well, first of all, I wasn't hearing my mask either. But it seems like here we're just spread out, you guys are so much further away. I don't know, is it easier to be distracted, especially if you're sitting back there, than if you were sitting in room 20? So that's one thing I noticed. Try not to let this room get you. I know a lot of you are used to this room for ensembles, but here we have to do an academic class in this room just because there's no other way around it. So that's one thing I've noticed. It's just a little different of a dynamic. Not too much, but it is a little different. So. All right, so today what we're going to do is we are going to talk about transposition. We're going to talk about it today, and if the weather cooperates, we're going to talk about transposition one more time on Wednesday. Those of you that have had me for theory, which is you kind of know how I deal with transposition, I believe. I know it's been a while, but I try to take one class period and focus just on basic transposition, and that is determining how to find the actual sound out of a transposing instrument. And then I'll wait till Wednesday and we'll talk about then the opposite thing, and that is, if you're given the actual sound, or you know the actual sound, how do you know what to write for that transposing instrument? Okay? Because generally, notation, the written part is the transposed part. The actual sound is, of course, the sound you hear. That's not usually what we're dealing with when we're writing. And so, since you've had me for theory, and I usually teach this in theory 2, so again, that's been many years for some of you. Since you had me, you probably had several other classes that talked about transposition in one way or form or another. So for instance, I don't know, maybe you get transposition discussed. Well, do you talk about transposition like in your class ins? Like in class in brass? In class in woodwinds? Probably not so much class in strings. I mean, the double bass sort of technically transposes, but usually your brass and your woodwinds are going to be the main ones. And I would imagine, although I don't know because I've never sat in or observed any of those classes, do the teachers for your class ins, do they teach transposition differently? I mean, we're trying to get all at the same answer, the same point, but maybe they come about in a different way. I don't know, for instance, when you took your class in brass, maybe that was a year ago, maybe that's this semester, I don't, or your class in woodwinds. But everybody seems to come to this class with somewhat of an idea. It's just, everyone's at different maybe stages, or some people have forgotten more than others, that kind of thing. So, but I do think it's helpful just to review that, to start from square one and go over it one more time, especially for this class, since we're going to be dealing with not only the woodwinds, but also brass and maybe some other transposing instruments as well. All right. So with that said, well, I have a mess on the board here. When we see, let's say I'm in trouble class, when we see the notated or the written pitch A, like that, on a staff, and we sing that pitch, we hope and we expect that an A comes out of our mouth. Right? When we see this same pitch and we play it on an instrument, we would logically expect that same pitch, an A, to come out of that instrument also. That would be nice if everything worked that way. But as you know, with some instruments, we see an A and we play an A and the A comes out. But with other instruments, that's not necessarily true. They see the A, they use the fingering or whatever the slide position, well, not slide position, that's a bad example, but they use the fingering for an A, but another pitch, a different pitch, comes out. So certain instruments produce different pitches than the pitches that are notated or written on the staff. Some of these instruments make sound pitches that are higher than the notated instrument. Some of these transposing instruments sound pitches that are lower than the notated pitch on the staff. Okay? And we call these types of instruments that produce different tones, different pitches than what we see, what is written on the staff. We call them transposing instruments. Transposing instruments. I don't even know that we need to necessarily go through a list of instruments that transpose, a list of instruments that don't, because I think by this time you guys are pretty familiar with some of the main ones that don't transpose, the main ones that do transpose. So for instance, does the flute transpose? No. At the opposite end of the pitch spectrum, does the tuba transpose? No, the tuba doesn't transpose. Does the oboe transpose? No. Does the trombone transpose? No. Does the English horn transpose?
No.
Well, maybe we should go through. Yes, the English horn does transpose. Let's maybe list a few transposing instruments. And of course, we can't make an exhaustive list here. We won't get all of them. But the English horn is a transposing instrument. Yeah. If the English horn player sees this pitch and plays this, fingers this pitch, a completely different pitch is going to come out of the instrument. Okay, what about, well, you tell me. Give me some other instruments that you know are transposing instruments. Okay, the clarinet. Definitely. Trumpet. Yep. Saxophone. Yep. Okay, horn, and in that case you mean probably the French one, yeah. I call the French horn by default, I call it the horn. Let's see if there's any others that we're going to need to deal with. Besides, these are some of the main ones, of course. Okay. Yeah, I guess I'll put this in the same column too. There are some instruments that they sound a completely different pitch than what's written on the staff. Then there are some instruments that transpose, they don't sound a different pitch, they just sound in a different octave. What are some of those that just sound in a different octave? Okay, the double bass, and you had said what? Yep, the piccolo. I know this one isn't a very common one, but another one that sounds just an octave lower than written is the contra bassoon. And that reminds me, the bassoon is another woodwind that does not transpose. The bassoon is, I know it's not transposing. Okay, now, the names of transposing instruments usually include the name of a key. And the name of their key is usually the key in which the instrument is pitched. So for instance, we may have a B-flat clarinet, or an A clarinet, or a clarinet in E-flat, things like that. And again, the name of the key in which it's pitched, this key always identifies the sounding pitch that will be heard when a written C is played. When a written C is played. So let's go back to this treble clef. So these transposing instruments, when they see this written C, for instance, let's say we have a B-flat clarinet. When the B-flat clarinetist sees this notated C, and they put down the fingering for this C, what is the actual sound or pitch that comes out of the instrument? A B-flat, yeah, and it turns out to be this B-flat right here. Not a B-flat above, and not the B-flat, multiply, so we're looking like that. Okay? So we have B-flat clarinet, we have other types of clarinets. A very common type of trumpet is like the clarinet, a B-flat trumpet. Does anyone know in what key is the alto saxophone pitch? E-flat, that's right. And the French horn is pitched in F. So for instance, when a French horn player plays a written C with the fingering, whatever, and F comes out, that kind of thing. And what is the English horn pitched in, even though we don't usually give it a key? The English horn is pitched in F, just like the French horn. Yeah. Although we never would say that it's an F English horn, we don't say English horn in F. So that's how I'm going to put it in parentheses. A helpful phrase to remember when dealing with transposing instruments is, if you see a C, you sound your name. So meaning, again, a B-flat clarinet, if a B-flat clarinet player sees a C written, they play that, they sound the pitch of the key of their instrument. They sound B-flat. So a French horn player sees a C and plays that, we get an F. The alto saxophone sees this, plays that with whatever fingering, you actually get the E-flat and major 6 down. We'll go over some of this more specifically. But if you see your transposing instrument, if you see a C and you play that written note, you sound your name. Oh, and I can actually, if I can show you an example from one of the two texts for this class. Let me increase the size of this so you can. Okay. So there's a couple different clarinets. You see the clarinet on the left in B-flat? you see the pitch that's written for the clarinet is middle C. You see that the note that's actually heard is the B flat a whole step below. What about the clarinet in A? Well, the clarinet in A, since the instrument is a little different, you see a written C, you play a written C, but the note that comes out of that instrument is actually a minor third below the written note, which is an A. Do we have clarinet players in here? Yeah. Is the clarinet, the A clarinet, is it just slightly bigger?
Yeah, it has it's a little big, it has a key extension.
Yeah, in fact,
lower joint.
when we get to the clarinet specifically in this class, we'll see that the range of the clarinet A goes down a half step, I think, lower than the clarinet B flat. And I think part of that is because the clarinet A is just a little bit bigger. You know, and the bigger your instrument, the size of your instrument, the lower the pitch that can come out of the instrument, the deeper the tone, because there's more space for air to move and resonate and all that kind of thing. And then finally, here's one that's a really weird, a rare instrument. It's an alto clarinet in E flat. It's not the little clarinet in E flat, it's the alto clarinet in E flat. So the alto clarinet in E flat, they see a middle C, they play a middle C, and this E flat comes out. So it looks like the alto clarinet, oops, I'm upside down and backwards. So the alto clarinet in E flat transposes just like the E flat alto saxophone. But this, you don't have to know all the specific instruments yet. Does the concept make sense? Okay. The concept makes sense to me. I'll just take it. Okay. The most important pieces that I feel, pieces of information necessary for understanding instrument transposition are, what do you think I'm going to say? Okay. The interval of transposition for the instrument, and then the direction of transposition for the instrument. I find that those two pieces of information are critical. If you know by memory, eventually we'll get to memorize these, the interval of transposition for each transposing instrument, and if you know the direction of transposition for each transposing instrument, that is up or down. That's what we're talking about, direction. I think that's it's one of the most important things to keep straight in your mind in order to understand how instrument transposition works. Okay. Let's try one other thing that I want to show you, and this comes actually from your textbook. I find this paragraph on page 89 to be very important, very helpful, and that's why between now and next class I do want you to read pages 88 and 89. Here it is. Let me shrink this a little bit. This is the top paragraph on page 89 in your textbook. In dealing with transposing instruments, we encounter two types of transposition. One is called the reading type. That's the kind that's involved when we are reading a score and have the problem of converting transposed written pitches to actual sound or concert pitches. Then there's two. There's the other kind, which I'm going to leave for Wednesday's class. The other kind is the writing type of transposition, in which we have to convert actual pitches, actual sounds, that's what we're starting with, to transposed written pitches. The difference between the two types of transposition is, of course, only one of direction. That's it. Up or down. If this distinction is understood at the outset and kept in mind, a good deal of confusion can be avoided. That's what we want, right? In all your classes, we just want to avoid confusion. Yeah. Do I know how I'm going to get home tonight? Not really. That's confusing, but I'll have to deal with that when the time comes, right? But we like to avoid confusion. Okay? So what I would like to focus on mostly today is number one, the reading type. That is, we're going to have pitches already written and transposed and correctly transposed and notated for these instruments. And we just want to find out what's the actual sound that's coming out of it. That's it. Okay. All right. Now, it's nice to know that, where did I have this in my notes here? Well, somewhere I have this. The majority of transposing instruments, it's good to know that the majority of them sound below their written pitches. There are some that sound above, but for the majority of transposing instruments, like the ones that I have here before, the majority of them, their actual sound is below where the notated or written pitch is. Okay? And I'm going to give you a handout. This handout I do not distribute in my theory class. This one just gives a whole bunch of factual information, interval and direction about transposing instruments. I put it on a green sheet because I want you to be able to locate and find this. I don't want your dog to eat this. I don't want you to feed it to your dog or anything like that. You know, it's not easy being green, first of all, much less feeding it to your dog. So let's take a just quick look at this. I don't expect you to memorize everything on this sheet, but there are a lot of helpful instruments to transpose that we'll need to be aware of and discuss. So at the top, right beneath the title where it says instrument transposition, I put that key phrase that I had mentioned to you before, right? What is that key phrase or important phrase? When any instrument plays written C, it sounds its pitch name. For instance, when a blah, 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 yeah, F horn plays written C, it sounds F. So that's just a reminder I like to put up there on the top. Now, you can see the families of transposing instruments on this green sheet are, I put them in bold so you can kind of find them quickly. We have the clarinets, we have the saxophones, then we have the horns, then we have the trumpets, and then we have other instruments off to the right. Just incidentally, the families of instruments listed in bold on the left in the column there, are those listed in score order? At least the families? Yeah, because clarinets are always notated above saxophones in the full score, and in orchestral scores anyways, horns are notated above trumpets, that kind of thing. Okay. All right, so that's a little bit beside the point. There are tons of different clarinets, as you can see, tons of different horns and trumpets, all pitched in different keys. We don't need to know all of these. In fact, some of these I think I even have listed there would be rare. Yeah, there's one of them, like the first, the high C, the horn that's pitched in a high C, that's a really rare instrument. But it's better to have more information than not enough. So chances are, if you don't know how an instrument transposes, hopefully it will be on this sheet in the future for you. Some of these I'm hoping that you will commit to memory, just because we're going to be seeing them quite frequently. We'll be writing for them. They're just that much more commonly used than some of the other instruments are. But I feel that this sheet can be helpful. So use it as a reference when you need to. Now, of course, when we get to a quiz or a test, I'm not going to allow you to use this sheet for that. But by that time, hopefully you'll know the drill and you'll know which instruments are probably more important than others. I should also mention that in case you, heaven forbid, you misplace your green sheet, there is an appendix in the back of your text. It's called Appendix B. And let's see if I can find out where that starts. It starts on page 386. Appendix B has not only the ranges of the instruments, which we'll get to when we talk about the instruments individually, but it does tell you how the actual sound compares to the written pitch for the transposing instrument. And there might even be more that are listed in Appendix B than I have on the green sheet. So don't fret. Don't feel like you're cornered or something. You have no options if you don't have your handout or something. Because there is another alternative. That's Appendix B in your book, in the back of your textbook. Let's see how transposition works with some, I guess with some a concrete example. Now this handout I'm going to give you, some of you have gotten before. In fact, most of you have. This is one of the same handouts I give when I teach transposition in theory too. So just bear with me again. We won't go through the whole thing, but I find it can be helpful. Actually, yeah, I should just give you that. If some of you have this framed or put on your fridge and you don't need another copy, just let me know. All right, so another thing that I like about the top of this handout is it actually divides the instruments in three different categories. Ones that don't transpose at all, ones that transpose by an octave, and then ones that transpose by a different pitch. You can see that at the top, and there are some examples listed in there for you if you want to double check and reread that. I would like, however, to just go into the situation 1 box. Situation 1 box on the left is what your book calls the reading type of transposition. That is, you have the transpose notation. We just need to find out what the actual sound of the transposing instrument that is coming out of the horn is. Okay? So, in situation box number 1, it says you have the written out instrument part, which is already transposed. You have that as in the score. What you need to know are what notes will sound when that part is performed. And again, with most of the transposing instruments, the written notation, what we see, is higher than the actual sound of the transposing instrument. What we hear is generally, for most of them, the actual sound is lower or below the written pitch. Okay? So, what do? All we have to do is just transpose the notes the way the instrument transposes. In other words, the way that's listed for you on the green sheet. For example, a B-flat trumpet transposes down a major second. If the B-flat trumpet has G in its written out part, you would transpose the D down a whole step or a major second to get the sounding pitch in F. So let's take a look at this. Here's the transpose notation. Again, written notation is usually the transpose part for these instruments. Actual sound, what we would actually hear, this is it. You see how the first 4 notes in this score, notated score up here, are C, B flat, C, D. Well, the actual sound notes are going to be a whole step below all those. That is B flat, A flat, B flat, and C. And you get the idea. I think once you get started and you're on the right track, the rest of it will come no problem. Does anyone have any questions about how we go from this, the transpose notation, to this, the actual sound? You see that these notes are all exactly a major second lower than the notated pitches, than the written pitches for the instrument. Why? Well, because this is trumpet in B flat. It says on your green handout, it says that a trumpet in B flat sounds a major second below its written pitch. So really, you just, at least at this stage, you're just don't have to worry too much about changing direction. You're just going to obey the direction that's actually listed right here. You don't have to do anything more difficult than that. You don't have to complicate it any more than that. Now, some of you, I'm sure, know this because I mentioned this in theory too. Let's take a look at the key signatures of these 2 examples. You see that the written score has 1 flat. We'll say that that's in F major. How do I know in what key is the actual sound going to be heard? What is that key, by the way? E flat major, yeah. If my written notation for the transposing instrument, the trumpet in B flat, is transposed, it's F major, that's the key. How do I know ahead of time that the actual sound is going to be E flat major? It's not a trick question. Yeah, because the key transposes down a major second too, just like every single note does. That's right. So, keys, I don't know how really else to put it, but keys transpose just like notes do. If the notes have to go down, for instance, a minor third, like with a clarinet A, well then the key, the key will also go down a minor third as well. The key will also go down a minor third. And you can use the key signature for the appropriate key once you know what key is going to be the actual sound. Now, another thing I should mention before I forget, and again, a lot of you may know this, what does this term mean? Like when I say concert G, or when I say the concert key of G minor. What does this word concert mean? Okay, concert means actual sound. It always means no transposition involved. Actual sound, that's what concert means. It's another way of saying actual sound. All right, so, well, this would actually probably tie more to the class on Wednesday. Yeah, I probably better not know that. I'll save that for Wednesday. Let me know, by the way, if you do have any questions about this. What I'd like to do is over here, before class, I put up some transposed pitches. Some pitches that have already been notated or transposed correctly for what these transposing instruments that I'm going to put up here in a moment will read from. And I just want you to be able to tell me what the actual sound that comes out of the instrument will be. So let's take this first one. You can see we're in treble clef, and we have a notated F sharp. What is the actual sound that's going to come out of the instrument if a clarinet in B flat were to play a notated F sharp? Anybody? E, that's right, a major second lower, right? So the actual sound that will come out of the horn is the E. And technically it's going to be this E right here. That's a major second lower. The next one, I have a notated D flat. And I need to know what pitch will actually sound when a clarinet A performer plays that. Okay, it's going to be B flat. It's going to be this one right here. And how far lower than the B flat is the B flat? Minor third. That's how far, that's the interval of transposition for the clarinet A. It sounds a minor third lower than ripple. Let's see, the next one that I have a notated G sharp, and this is for a horn in F. What's the actual sound that's going to come out of the horn? First of all, and if you need to use your green sheet at this point, that's fine. How does the actual sound for a horn compare to its written pitch? Okay, it sounds a perfect fifth lower than written. So what note is a perfect fifth lower than G sharp? C sharp. This one right here. The next one is a notated, oh, this one's the other one. This one's a notated E flat. And I want to know what sound comes out of the horn with a trumpet in D. Yeah, it's going to be an F. The trumpet in D is one of those oddball transposing instruments that sounds higher than its written pitch. In fact, it technically sounds a whole step or a major second higher than its notated pitch. So if I've got a written or a notated E flat, when the trumpet and D player plays that or fingers that on the instrument, this is the note that's going to actually Big zoom thing. How about this next one? I have still in treble clef a notated A and bass clarinet. What's the actual sound or pitch that comes out of the instrument if they never see that notated A? Okay, a G. Now, is it this G right here? No. It's actually a major ninth lower. Okay? So this would be a major second lower, that G right there. One octave below that G, and it's actually this one right here. So you're right, a G comes out of the horn, but it's an octave and a second lower for the bass clarinet. F sharp notated. What's the actual pitch if an E flat alto sax player plays that notated F sharp? An A. This A right here. How do you know that? Because you know, or you're getting to know then, that an E flat alto sax sounds a major sixth lower than its written notated pitch. All right, just a couple more here. How about, I've got a notated C flat in the bass clef, and this is written for a double bass player. What note comes out of the, or comes out of the horn? What note do you actually hear off of this? That's right, you're going to hear a C flat, but it's going to be this one right here, an octave lower. There's a pitch on the staff with a key signature this time. These ones didn't have key signatures. This one does. Be careful here. What is the actual pitch that's going to sound out of the English horn with that notated pitch? G sharp? How do we know it's G sharp? What's the notated pitch, first of all? D sharp, that's right, because the key signature is making a D sharp. And an English horn sounds a perfect fifth lower than written, just like a French horn. So the actual sound coming out of the horn is going to be G sharp. Not just D, because the key signature makes the notated pitch D sharp. So, I want you to be careful in the future. I mean, when I just give you a notated pitch with an accidental right on that and no key signature, you know, then you can take the written note for what it is, basically. And you can here as well, but just be careful. If there's a note with a key signature, make sure you identify what the precise written note is first before you do your transposing or your calculating. Does anyone have any questions so far? Right. One other thing I wanted to show you or explain to you is this. And I don't want to get too much into this, too detailed, but I do want to get a little more detailed into this than I do in my Theory 2 classes. And that is, because there's always the question, and this question may be bouncing around in your mind too, and that is, why do we even have to deal with transposition at all? Why do we mess around with transposing instruments? Because it's kind of cumbersome, not only for the player sometimes, but also for the conductor. Why do we even mess around with the deal with it? Have you ever thought about that, or have you ever thought about that question? Does anyone know? Okay, that's, I would say that it's starting to scratch the surface, yeah. Were you going to say something?
Like with manufactured instruments, like if it's manufactured in a certain field, it's easier to play as opposed to, or more commonly found.
Yeah, I think that's part of it too. There's actually several answers to that question. Why do we even mess around with transposition? One of the answers to that question is actually found again in your textbook. I think the author does a fairly decent job. Back on page 89, which is why I want you to read that page. The author puts forth or advances a few reasons why we even mess around with transposition at all. And I know it just looks like a bunch of words, but it's really not that much on page 89. So, for instance, if we look at the second paragraph on page 89, it says, considering the complications that this whole transposition system involves, not only for orchestrator and score reader, a very natural question at this point is, why must it be used at all? And it says, well, you could get really technical about it, but there's one part right there, starting over there where it says, as far as resonance and good intonation are concerned, one of the reasons is that the B flat and the A clarinets are superior to the now obsolete C clarinet. You know, I'm not a clarinetist, so I never would have thought of that. I don't know that. I don't think of that. Those of you that are clarinetists or that have taken a class in woodwinds or anything like that, do you ever talk about how the B flat and the A clarinets are actually superior in resonance and intonation to the non-transposing clarinet? Huh. Maybe that's why there's one of the reasons why those are still used rather than the C clarinet. And the C clarinet, by the way, would not transpose that. I hope that's understood. Another thing, after that same sentence, since the B flat and A clarinet started out as transposing instruments and have been treated as such ever since, how many hundreds of, over 100 years has the clarinet been around? I don't know. I have to talk with, Dr. Colbert. But since it's been, these B flat and A clarinets have been treated as transposing instruments ever since, a change to another method of notation now it'd be almost basically impossible. Why make a change now? Can you imagine how much more confusion that would create? Okay, so there's a couple reasons maybe why we have some of the transposing instruments. Another reason down below here, and this is one of the reasons I latch onto, it says an advantage of the transposition principle, let's apply it to clarinets, is this. It allows for a pattern of fingering common to clarinets of different sizes. The player does not need to learn new fingering in order to perform on a different size clarinet. Okay? So in other words, if you learn a set of fingerings for pitches on a B flat clarinet, you don't have to relearn the different set of fingerings for those same pitches when you play bass clarinet. It's the size of the instrument that gives you a deeper sound. So if we want to raise the sound that the bass clarinet produces, then we just have to move the notation. And the notation is not hard to move. Okay. Another very similar reason to what the book is saying there on page 89. I get this out of my other book. Let's take a look at this. And this maybe gets a little more nitty-gritty. Usually an instrument, this is the second paragraph here. An instrument is written as a transposing instrument so that the performer may transfer eye and hand coordination skills learned on one family member to other instruments in the same family. This applies to clarinets. It applies especially to saxophones. I would imagine it applies to trumpets, things like that. Thus, and they always use a clarinet, for instance, for an example, I don't know. Thus, when a clarinetist sees the written pitch middle C, and again, I'm not a clarinetist, but it says the clarinetist covers the holes played by the thumb and first three fingers of the left hand. Is that correct? To play middle C? Left hand, thumb, and first three fingers? Anyway, so the clarinetist fingers that middle C, all right. And the clarinetist would use those fingers for that written pitch no matter which clarinet is being played. Whether you're playing the B flat clarinet, the A clarinet, the E flat clarinet, the E flat alto clarinet, the bass clarinet, the contrabass clarinet, it doesn't matter. This allows you to move fluidly among those different size clarinets. As long as they're of the same family, you don't have to learn a set of new fingerings based on the notation of the pitch you see on the set. And that's true of saxophones. Again, same thing on it. So, the pitch that will be heard depends on the physical size of the instrument that is actually being played. Again, the bigger the instrument, the deeper or the lower the sound will be even though you have different players on the same, you have, let's say you have like a person that's playing a B-flat clarinet here and a bass clarinet over here. You're going to read the same pitch, the middle C. You're going to get a higher pitch out of the B-flat clarinet than you will out of the bass clarinet because the bass clarinet is just bigger in size, physically. So I don't know if this, I hope this doesn't convolute or confuse things more, but I did want to talk a little more in this class about why we deal with transposing instruments and transposition at all. You think, you know, it's the 21st century, there could be a way that musicians and people could figure out a way to fix it so that you don't have to deal with that. But there are some advantages to it. And these are some of the reasons why. Okay. All right, does anyone have any, let me pause for questions again. Is this like the 12th time you're getting transposition taught to you in your musical curriculum here? The assignment that I'm giving you is well, I'm giving you a score here with some non-transposing instruments and some transposing instruments. And I want you to reduce everything to concert key, concert pitches. Okay? And I've given you the space to do that down here. I think when you read the instructions, I think it'll make sense to you. Just because I notate the bassoon above the horn in score order, that doesn't mean that the bassoon's pitches are going to actually sound above the horn's pitches when you put it in concert key. So just be careful about that. Well, if there are no other questions, I guess we can break for today. Be safe out there. Try not to slip and slide or get buried. And hopefully we'll see you on Wednesday.
Everyone reads the B-flat treble or
And that's from your experience with the Nebraska back then?
I thought I read B-flat. The old systems are B-flat.
Okay. Awesome.
So this was starting